Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a stack of sources on a case that was, well, simultaneously a local horror story and a real national legal earthquake. We're talking about the 2012 Lei Family Murders in San Francisco's Ingleside neighborhood.
Yeah, and this deep dive is important because this case, often called the quintuple slayings in some Chinese media, isn't just about, a horrific crime. It's really about a failure, or maybe a loophole is the better word, in the legal system, specifically U.S. immigration and deportation law. It's how the perpetrator was even there.
Right, so we're tracking two big things today. The physical evidence that actually solved the murders, and then these surprising, almost technical legal issues that kind of set the stage for it all.
Exactly. It's a complex one.
Let's start with the tragedy itself. I mean, the impact on the community must have been just immense.
It's absolutely devastating. The discovery was March 23rd, 2012, at 16 Houth Street. A family member shows up at this row house, finds 5 victims, all related Chinese immigrants, slain. Inside the house, even in the backyard, it was the elderly couple, their 2 adult children, and the daughter-in-law. Just 5 people gone.
And I remember reading police initially thought maybe murder-suicide, which just shows how chaotic it must have looked at first.
Yeah, that was the very initial thought, but it shifted almost immediately. The nature of the injuries just didn't fit. We're talking massive, blunt trauma. Investigators figured an edged weapon was involved, though, interestingly, they never actually found it, but definitely ruled out gunshots.
Chilling. And there was that detail about a neighbor hearing something.
Right. A neighbor reported hearing an angry or yelling loud male person around midnight the night before. Really adds a layer to it.
It's important we take a moment to remember who was lost. Their lives sometimes get overshadowed by all the legal stuff that came later. You had the father, Hua Shenlei, a cook known for his roast duck. The mother, Wan Yushu, a cashier. Their daughter, Yingsu Jess Lei, she was a software engineer. And their son, Vincent, an architect, and his wife, Chiawai Chantal Chu, who was a student. Just, a family building their lives.
A terrible, terrible loss. And then just 2 days later, the police focus zeroes in. They arrest 35-year-old Binh Thai Luc.
Luke? He was a local guy, a plumber, I think.
That's right. San Francisco resident, plumber by trade. He actually knew the family. Sources say he was a friend of one of the adult children, a frequent guest at the house even.
Okay, so he wasn't a stranger.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But there's another side. He was also known to be affiliated with a Vietnamese street gang, and he had a pretty extensive criminal record going way back.
Now, looking at the legal side, it seems like it took forever to get to trial. Arrested in 2012, but the trial doesn't start until October 2017.
Yeah, 5.5 years. It's a long time. Lots of complex preliminary hearings, evidence review, that kind of thing. Took a while to build the case.
So when it finally gets to trial, what's the prosecution's core argument? What did they hang their hat on?
It really came down to very specific physical evidence. They aimed to build an absolutely airtight case showing Lucas was there at the time of the murders.
Okay, what were those key pieces, the smoking guns, so to speak?
Well, maybe not smoking guns, but definitely compelling forensic evidence. 3 main things. First, they found Luc's fingerprint on a bottle of Windex at the crime scene.
Windex. Okay, so maybe indicating a cleanup attempt.
Exactly. That leads to the second point. Victim's blood. Found not just on jeans at Luc's place, but also inside his car.
In his car. That's pretty damning.
And the third piece ties back to his job. The prosecution suggested he actually used his plumbing know-how. They theorized he disassembled sinks trying to flood the house.
To destroy evidence, like wash it all away.
That was the theory, using his specific skills to try and cover his tracks.
Okay, so strong physical evidence placing him there, plus this very specific cleanup theory. What about motive? The why? Usually the prosecution needs a strong why.
Right. And that's where it gets a bit fuzzier. They pointed towards money. Specifically, that Luc had gambling losses, mentioned Artichoke Joe's casino.
But didn't they find money at the scene?
Yes. And that's the big complication. Sources confirm thousands of dollars in cash were found completely untouched at the crime scene. That was a major point during police testimony.
So if you're the defense, that's your opening right there. You're saying, hold on, if he killed 5 people over money, why leave stacks of cash?
Exactly right. The defense, led by Mark Goldrosen, hammered that point. They argued the police got tunnel vision on Lukic way too early. They claimed other leads weren't followed up properly, like a tip about a Chinatown gang leader maybe ordering the hits, or some untested DNA samples found at the scene.
So their argument wasn't necessarily that he wasn't there at all?
Not quite. Their position was more nuanced. They suggested Lukic might have been present, but someone else masterminded and carried out the killings. Basically, that more than one person had to be involved, and the prosecution just couldn't prove a clear, believable motive for Luke himself to do it.
That must have been tough for the jury. You have this mountain of physical evidence saying he was there, blood in his car, but then this question mark over the motive and the untouched cash.
Absolutely. But in the end, the physical evidence seems to have carried the weight. After a 7-week trial, about a week of deliberation, the jury came back. Guilty.
Guilty on all counts.
5 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted robbery, though, that got adjusted later. We'll get to that. And 2 counts of burglary. The sentence came in March 2018. 5 consecutive life terms. No parole.
Okay, let's unpack that verdict a bit. 2 counts of burglary. It was 1 house, right? A row house. How do you get 2 burglaries?
This is where property law gets really specific and actually impacts a murder sentence. The judge upheld 2 counts because the house was technically set up as 2 separate living units.
Oh, like an upstairs and a downstairs apartment kind of thing?
Pretty much. The elder couple and daughter lived upstairs, the younger couple downstairs. Each had its own entrance, its own separate space.
So the legal thinking was he violated 2 separate reasonable expectations of privacy.
That's the exact legal phrase. He entered 2 distinct households, essentially. So the architecture of the building itself led to 2 burglary convictions. It added legal weight.
Fascinating detail. And what about the appeal? I know they looked at those attempted robbery convictions.
They did. The appellate court took a close look. They upheld the big ones, the murder convictions, the burglary convictions. Said the evidence was sufficient there.
But not the robbery.
Well, not all of them. They actually overturned 3 of the 5 attempted robbery convictions.
3 out of 5. Why the split? That seems very specific.
It was. The reasoning was basically about where the evidence showed intent. The court ruled the evidence only supported Luke trying to rob the younger couple, the ones downstairs, whose rooms he actually entered. But they decided the evidence didn't clearly show he specifically tried to rob the other 3 victims upstairs, whose bedrooms he apparently didn't go into.
So the attempted robbery conviction hinged on which specific bedroom doors he crossed.
Essentially, yes. They narrowed the scope of the crime based on where the intent to rob could be proven within the different parts of the house. It really shows how these cases can turn on tiny, almost legalistic details.
Wow. Okay, so the conviction stands, but with that nuance. Now, this brings us to that whole other massive issue. This case blew wide open the reason Luke was even free to be in San Francisco in the first place.
Right. The conviction is one thread, but the other, maybe even more impactful nationally, is the controversy around immigration and deportation policy.
Let's shift to that. What was Luke's status before 2012? You mentioned a criminal record.
Yeah, so Luke was originally from Vietnam. He immigrated legally to the U.S. back in 1989. But then in 1998, he gets convicted for armed robbery and assault with a firearm. Serious stuff.
Armed robbery. Okay.
He served 8 years and an 11-year sentence. When he got out in 2006, he was ordered deported.
Ordered deported. So why wasn't he? Why was he still in the U.S. 6 years later able to commit these murders?
And that is the absolute crux of the controversy. He was ordered deported, yes, but Vietnam refused to issue the travel documents needed to actually send him back.
Why wouldn't they take him back?
It comes down to a specific agreement, the 2008 U.S.-Vietnam Repatriation Agreement. That deal explicitly excludes people who arrived in the U.S. before 1995.
Before 1995. Why that specific date?
Well, according to a law professor quoted in our sources, the thinking from the Vietnamese government side was that these pre-1995 arrivals, who were mostly refugees fleeing communism after the war, were seen as, quote, products of the United States. So Vietnam basically said they left because of circumstances related to the U.S. We're not taking them back if they commit crimes there now.
Okay, so Vietnam says no paperwork because he arrived before 95. But wait, if the U.S. has someone like Luke, a serious felony conviction deportation order, why couldn't ICE just keep him detained indefinitely if needed until Vietnam changed its mind or something?
And that's where the U.S. Supreme Court comes in. A critical ruling from 2001, Zadvidas v. Davis. This case is central to why Luke was released.
Zadvidas v. Davis. What did that case decide?
It basically put limits on how long the U.S. government can detain immigrants who have been ordered deported, but whose home country won't accept them back, these so-called unremovable aliens. The court said indefinite detention wasn't permissible.
So there's a time limit?
Yes. The ruling established what's called a presumptively reasonable detention period. It's 180 days after the final removal order. If after those 180 days, the government still can't secure the person's removal, can't get the travel documents, basically they generally have to release them back into the U.S., usually under some kind of supervision.
So let me get this straight. Luc finishes his prison sentence for armed robbery in 2006. ICE takes him into custody because he has a deportation order. But because Vietnam won't issue papers due to the pre-1995 rule, and because of the Zedvitas ruling, after 180 days in ICE custody, the U.S. legally had to let him go back onto the streets.
That's precisely it. He was released in 2006, legally required. And that set of circumstances, that structural issue in the law, is what led directly to the massive political backlash after the Lei Family Murders happened 6 years later.
You can imagine the reaction. San Francisco's mayor at the time, Ed Lee, he spoke out forcefully, didn't he?
He did. He publicly asked the federal government to figure out ways to stop situations like this, to prevent serious felons who couldn't be deported from being released back into the very communities where they committed their crimes.
And politically, particularly among congressional Republicans, this became Exhibit A for what they called a dangerous catch-and-release loophole, right? Blaming the Zedvitas ruling.
Absolutely. Luc's case was brought up again and again in Congress. It fueled calls for new laws, things like the Keep Our Communities Safe Act, the Deport Foreign Convicted Criminals Act. These were proposed specifically to try and change the rules, either to allow for longer detention periods beyond that 180 days, or to put pressure on countries like Vietnam by, say, denying visas to their citizens if they refuse to take back their own deportees. Luc's case really became a symbol in that whole debate.
And it even strained things internationally between the U.S. and Vietnam.
Definitely highlighted a major sticking point in that 2008 agreement. By 2017, years after the murders, the two governments actually formed a specific working group. His whole purpose was to try and resolve these ongoing issues about deporting Vietnamese nationals who arrived before that 1995 cutoff. The case had real diplomatic ripples.
So looking back at this whole thing, it's stark. You have these two narratives running side by side. On one hand, the really meticulous police work and prosecution using forensics, the fingerprint on the Windex, the blood evidence to get a conviction to achieve some measure of justice.
Right. The system working, in a way, on the criminal justice side.
But then running parallel, you have this massive structural issue in immigration law, treaty limitations, Supreme Court rulings, all combining in a way that tragically allowed the perpetrator to be free in the first place.
It's such a contrast. Like you said, the conviction ultimately relied on these tiny details interpreting property law about whether a house was 1 unit or 2 for those burglary counts. Super specific. And on the other side, his very presence, his freedom to commit the crime, hinged on another incredibly specific detail, that 1995 cutoff date in an international agreement.
And the U.S. government's hands being tied on detention because of a Supreme Court ruling designed, presumably, to protect against indefinite limbo.
Exactly. Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a really complex thought. When the pursuit of justice and public safety gets so tangled up in these hyper-specific technical details, whether it's the layout of a house for a burglary charge or a specific year in a treaty for deportation, what does that tell us about the inherent limits of legal systems when they intersect with international agreements and fundamental constitutional rights? How do we possibly balance the need for those legal constraints and rights with the demand for community safety? That's definitely something to mull over.
A tough question with no easy answers. Something to think about until our next deep dive.
Subscribe for more.